Good evening. I'd like to call this meeting of the Kalamazoo City Commission to order for Monday, September 10th, 2018. Roll call, please.
Commissioner Anderson. Here. Commissioner Cooney.
Present.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Here.
Commissioner Sykes.
Here.
Commissioner Urban. Vice Mayor Knott.
Here.
Mayor Hopewell.
Present. May we have a motion to excuse Commissioner Urban?
So moved.
Moved by Commissioner Cunningham.
Support.
Supported by Commissioner Anderson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carried. Communications, Mr. Manager?
Yeah, one item, Your Honor. I just want to highlight an event that will be happening this Friday. It's called Amnesty Day. The City of Kalamazoo Public Safety, along with the District Court and the County Prosecuting Attorney and the Sheriff's Department, will host an Amnesty Day at the 8th District Court. Reverend Nathan Dannison of the First Congregational Church has donated space in his church for sanctuary and court pre-screening on September 14th, this Friday, from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. And citizens will have the opportunity to address outstanding low-level, non-violent misdemeanor warrants and charges with the goal of preventing incarceration. Once participants have addressed their pending warrants and/or changes, they will be directed to Bronson Park, where social service agencies and other organizations will be available to assist in addressing some of their quality of life issues. The court and the prosecutors cannot promise that every case will be completed that day, but in those cases that cannot be accommodated, participants will be provided a future court date.
Thank you. Item C, Mr. Manager.
Thank you. So we come to you tonight starting the, actually a continuation of the fiscal year 19 budget preparation. And based on our calendar, this work actually began last spring. You'll recall a retreat we had where we looked at IK 2025 at work and those goal maps, and identified with input from public, the commission, FFE board, around the goal maps, and we'll get into those this evening. So this is just a continuation of that work. It's important work, and we're excited about highlighting a lot of this for you tonight. We'll also be looking at some work we're doing around measurement and metrics, and some tools that we're excited to talk about tonight. So as far as desired outputs go for this meeting, we want to early preview the 19 budget, ensure an understanding of the budget process and measuring our input, or our impact, connect resources to IK 2025 implementation, and discuss FFE, Foundation for Excellence funding recommendations for 2019, and then just highlight the budget calendar from this point forward until the end of the year. So the agenda will be the preview, budget innovations, measuring our impact, looking at the goal maps, highlighting the FFE 19 recommendations, and then next steps. So this graphic should be familiar by now. It really encapsulates the work that we've been on a journey doing. And right now, as you can see, the middle circle, the arrow is pointed to resource allocation, and through our budgeting process, that's where we align resources with our community goals, which we'll present tonight. And then we can move on from there and focus our work and the work of the Foundation for Excellence on achieving those goals and doing that work. So with that, I will turn it over to our budget manager, Jennifer Clark.
For those of you who don't know me, I'm Jennifer Clark. I've been with the city for 11 years. I've been working behind the scenes mostly in our accounting department, so this is my first opportunity to speak to you tonight, so thank you for listening. We've been looking at the 5-year fiscal projections for our general fund. This is our fiscal plan that we have going out for the next few years. This has been updated for our most recent projections that we have. This is without department input. It's just essentially math and known changes that we've made this year so far. We are working with the departments right now to actually fine-tune these numbers and get a better plan identified and identified. So this doesn't involve any new plans for next year's budget or any validation of the expenses as they may come out. Departments may have some more insight that they'll change these numbers slightly. But right now we're looking at favorable revenues and expenses from our original fiscal plan. Largely the spike that you're seeing in the graph for 2018 is derived by the recent sale of parking lots that we have done. The blue line is our projected revenues. The red line is our projected expenses. Expenses are expected to be a little higher than revenues this year, mostly because the spike is following the spike of the sale of the lots, because we are transferring that money to the DDA to help them with the parking system. That was part of the approval. And then we've just had some carry forwards from our prior fiscal year that you'll see in that number, and some one-time implementation goals that we've been implementing this year to take advantage of a more favorable 17 outcome. And then as you see going forward, we have a little bit of, again, one-time expenses in 2019, and then we start having a slightly better revenue than expenses in the out years at this time. For the 2019 budget process, we're very excited about some changes that we're implementing right now. We are working with OpenGov, and the city has been using OpenGov for a little while to start to get our financial information and our financial data in to make it a little bit more transparent. And they have a budget module that we are looking at. Mostly we're trying to get our budget process to be able to tell you the story of what's happening with our budget rather than just bring a bunch of numbers to you. We're asking departments this year to tell more of a story about what they're doing with their budgets and get what we're planning for the next fiscal year a little bit out of spreadsheets and more into a story of how we're planning on using the city's funds. We're looking to align budget with the budget dollars with initiatives, goals, and performance data. We want to really understand those ongoing versus one-time expenses. When you're looking at numbers, you don't necessarily have an appreciation of, is this thing going to keep going, or is this just a one-time expense? And so we're looking to get that into our budget process and be more transparent there. The OpenGov platform will allow us to have more real-time status as we're developing the budget. We'll be able to see more about where we are in the process and have an understanding of where we are and where the departments are in that process. It'll allow more collaboration eventually, even with our tax base if we choose to, or citizens of the city if we choose to go out. And then we really want an efficient and repeatable process so that our staff time is reduced by everything that all of the work that goes into trying to get the numbers to you. We want to be able to get the story to you faster than we've been able to do in the past. Is there any questions or discussion on that point?
Commissioner Urban?
This OpenGov software, does that have a charge connected with it? Is it annual, or is it a one-time purchase? Do we get updates covered in the cost that we pay them?
Yes, it is an annual subscription. Each component has its own price tags. I don't have those numbers in front of me. We just recently, in the last commission meeting, approved the budget module, which was going to be a $74,000 implementation for the budget module, and then it's a $42,000 ongoing expense.
Is there a budget module for training the people who are going to be interacting with the budget?
Yes. Actually, part of OpenGov's plan is to also have city commission training as part of their implementation. So.
We're going to be let in on this too?
Eventually you will, yes.
Okay, well, all right, good. Thank you.
Any further questions? I will hand this over to Karen Conley, our data manager.
Hi, I'm Karen Conley, the data manager for the city. I just started.
Move the microphone towards you. There you go.
Sorry. I'm Karen Conley, the data manager for the city. I just started with the city in March, and I'm excited to be here. I love all things data, so I'm really excited to work on all of the new data initiatives that are coming. To just recap a little bit, the city is working toward the 10 Imagine Kalamazoo goals with all of the sub-goals. And part of this will be allocating the resources with a priority-based budgeting. So it will tie in nicely with what Jennifer just talked about. So going forward, we're going to have a lot more transparency around all of the things that cities is doing, along with all of the measurements and metrics that we're setting up. And this will ultimately be publicly accessible on the web. This is going to be stored in the cloud with OpenGov. There are several different modules that we're working on. The first one that I'm currently implementing is the Open Data module that will essentially let us take all of our data, develop stories around the data, and make it accessible to everybody, and have them be able to understand what it is that we're working on and why these are our priorities, along with, you know, the goals and sub-goals. That'll give us a chance to develop new insights into our activities and to just make Kalamazoo a better place. This is the Imagine Kalamazoo architecture that was laid out. We're going to be using that as part of the website that we're working on to provide the drill-in into all of the key performance indicators. So once we have all of the data lined up and set up, we can start with this and drill into the data. We have several different initiatives. Right now, we're working on the design and really collecting all of the data that's in a lot of different places for the city to combine everything into the cloud architecture so the data will be consumable long term. The deployment is happening now. We are planning to be live prior to the 2019 budgeting process. I'm working with the different departments to get everything stood up and ready for consumption by everybody. We're working on quarterly meetings to refine and increase the number of metrics for the Imagine Kalamazoo 2025 goal map. So once we have all of the goals aligned with all of the metrics, we can then draw the direct line into the priority-based budgeting process. To date, we have 130 measures touching 10 out of 10 goals and 38 out of the 59 sub-goals, which is the rough number since the end of August. We're planning by this fall to have the sub-goals lined up for all 59 of those. It's a work in progress. We're hoping to be done this fall. We can't promise that because a lot of it depends on how the data is available and what all we have to do to make it consumable. Again, I'm excited to be here and to work on this with you. Are there any questions?
Questions, Commissioner? Commissioner Cunningham?
You said access to data. Is that within the agency or for the community at large?
Community at large.
All right. Can you give examples of some of that data?
So ultimately, we want to be able to have, for instance, code enforcement out there and crime statistics and other things relating to things that are important to the community, which is why we're doing the priority-based budgeting so we can just draw the direct lines.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Commissioner Anderson?
So I have to say, you know, we've been talking about this for a while. We've had discussions for many years related to this model of priority-based budgeting and all the measurements we're going to put in place. Still, as we continue to talk about it, I have to say, you know, it seems a bit overwhelming. And so I'm just wondering, from your experience, you come here with some, you know, expertise, obviously, and you look at this model we're trying to set up. I mean, is this quite a complicated process, or do you think this is doable? I mean, how do you put this relative to maybe other work you've done or things that other communities are doing? I don't know if that's a fair question or not.
It's definitely doable. We don't have to recreate the wheels. There There are other communities doing the same thing we're doing, and we can tag onto their experience because there are other communities that are further along in the process, and typically what I have found is that people are very ready to share and help out. Does that answer that?
Sure.
Get it?
Thank you.
I'm turning it over to Rebecca.
Good evening, Commissioners. So I'm going to walk you through the goal maps. You will be familiar with some of these. We worked through them in April at the retreat. And so the format is basically going to be the first map that you see. Oops, did I skip? We're going to have the projects that are funded for 2019. And let's see, I thought, yeah. I apologize, there's one missing. You're going to see the 5-year map that you used at the retreat and see your comments that were added to that. And then the second map is going to be those projects that staff is going to be focusing on for 2019. And so we're going to go through each one of those goals, all 10 goals. Now, I can focus on what CP and ED is doing, community planning and economic development, but all of my colleagues are here as well if you have other specific questions about projects that are coming forward in 2019. So all of the projects, whether it's KDPS, Public Services, Parks and Rec, IT, even the city manager's office, will be captured on these sheets. Okay, so the first one is Connected City. So understanding that this is where the Complete Streets work is being accomplished within this year. Several of these bullet points that are on the 2019 sheet relate to Complete Streets, but as you know, it's not just passing one policy and then all the work kind of comes. So it's the Complete Streets policy, it's the street design guidelines, it's the study that helps us be proactive about what those non-motorized projects look like. So it's all kind of broken down into those pieces. Any questions about the Connected City? Okay. Complete Neighborhoods. So when we discussed this in April, we had just started our neighborhood planning initiatives. So now we have 7 neighborhood plans that are in process. So, you know, the last meeting we passed and amended the master plan with the North Side Neighborhood Plan. And at the September 17th meeting, you will have the East Side Plan and the Vine Plan come forward. So it's pretty exciting work. Just to let you know that Millwood, Winchell, Arcadia neighborhood, and Edison neighborhood are also all kind of in the process, all in different places. So these are the 2019 projects that we're looking forward to. Pretty much everything on kind of the left-hand side has to do with the zoning update that we identified in the master plan, but some of the more specific zoning updates will be coming after some of the neighborhood plans are adopted. You will see a large North Side rezoning that will be coming forward as they wrapped up their master plan and identified the rezonings that needed to be done there. And similar with Vine, you will see the same. We'll also be exploring changes in creating strategies for our vacant and blighted commercial and residential structures, as well as creating rehabilitation strategies for existing homes. So we've got a lot of work that's coming forward in the neighborhoods. Any questions on the Complete Neighborhoods?
Madam Director, could you, when
No.
you say rehabilitation work in existing homes, could you talk a little bit about what you mean by that?
Sure. So in this past year, and Assistant City Manager Lamb will talk a little bit more about the partnership that we have with the Local Initiative Support Corporation and the Memorandum of Understanding that is helping us with some rehabilitation work. So in my office particularly, we have been working through code enforcements, folks who have code enforcements and may not be able to fix them on their own. We've been working with Kalamazoo Neighborhood Housing Services to identify specifically this year roofs Roofs are a huge maintenance issue. They can be really detrimental to a home if a roof fails, and maybe the walls fail, then the windows fail. So we try to get to roofs first. So we've specifically partnered with Kalamazoo Neighborhood Housing Services and funding that we received to help folks address roof issues.
Thank you.
So environmental responsibility. So we're working through a climate action plan this year, as well as working on several zoning updates that we feel like can assist us with better stormwater management, natural features protection, making sure we are making the best of all stormwater utilizations on site when we're doing new developments as well. Again, keeping environmental responsibility at the forefront in all of the projects that we're working on. One exciting project that's also happening this year is increasing the tree canopy, and we are planting over 200 trees this year in our neighborhood, so it's pretty exciting on all fronts. Also, again, getting back to that natural features protection and understanding how the flooding has been affecting our city is looking at an inventory of available land, whether that's vacant and abandoned, to identify some strategies for preservation of that land and of our floodways. For economic vitality, I'm just going to hit on, we have been working across city departments and including the merger of community planning and economic development to be sure that we are streamlining our application processes, materials, making things available online. We also, in February of this year, we did kind of a soft launch to our online permitting and started working with builders that we've had long relationships with to kind of work all the kinks out of online permitting. So we're still working through that, and things are going well so far. We have also been evaluating best practices like equity mapping to evaluate neighborhoods for a good baseline data so that we can understand and track if there are any risks to gentrification. Equity atlases exist throughout the nation, and the work that we're trying to do right now with each of the neighborhoods and in the neighborhood planning, and Karen kind of started the conversation with data. And it starts with data to understand so that we can track and know where are demographics changing, where are people moving, what are the income levels, how is development affecting this, and what is actually changing in these areas. This also goes towards a business development strategy. So we've come to the completion of the feasibility study, the incubator, and everybody knows that the city's ripe for it and we're excited about it. So now we need to get into the next phase, which is identifying where will this be located, how many square feet will it be, how many businesses can we sustain for that first year. So the same consultant, Greenwood Consulting, is going to be really helping us get to those details in how we begin to start an incubator in the city. Good governance is really our internal work. This is where we know we had to do some hard work in order to get Imagine Kalamazoo lifted and off of the ground, was we had to change some things internally. We needed to strengthen our partnerships and relationships and how we tell our story. And ACN Lamb will be talking also about how we've got some videos that we're producing and how we're putting together some of the incredible work that where we need to really tell our story. We need to talk more about incentivizing and engaging employee learning from other cities. In fact, this year I will be working with the city of Jackson, Mississippi. And we're going to be sharing some stories between, I get to teach them engagement, and then they're going to teach me some new inclusive work relationships that I can bring back to the internal city. We are also working on a full 311 call center implementation, which is pretty incredible work that's going to do a lot for our residents. Inviting public places. Of course, as you know, there's a parks and recreation plan that's happening right now. And so all of the details that are kind of on the left-hand side of this here are incorporating what we heard from Imagine Kalamazoo into that parks planning initiative. Just diving into the details. How will it actually happen? How's it going to get paid for? And safe community. Similarly here, we are utilizing, as far as community planning and development goes, we have been working through both helping homeless and others in need find services, resources, and assistance. It's been a huge part of our budget for many years. Looking at prevention strategies for people who, to prevent them from being discharged into the street, as well as investing, again, how will we invest in building rehabilitation, making sure that people have safe buildings with sprinkling, mechanical upgrades, whatever we can do to get some of these buildings that are not online now, how do we get those into our stock? We know that we have a building crisis. Strength through diversity is, again, this is at the cornerstone of our work. All things must be, it kind of goes back to the data question again, creating that equity atlas that helps us focus priorities to address equitable outcomes, to measure and adjust our programs. How are we using that lens across all of our plans? These are to track, measure, and make the case for inclusive growth, understanding the changing demographics, racial inclusion, and all of those opportunities. We are doing a lot of this by building our partnerships with neighborhoods to share in that decision making, and that's why those neighborhood plans are so critical, because that's where those details are coming in, and that's where we're reaching out and reaching into the neighborhoods deeper than we ever have before. Shared prosperity. As you know, we also passed a plan that is very much the focus of the shared prosperity goal map. But it started with Imagine Kalamazoo, and it started with the listening that really lifted up shared prosperity as a necessary strategic vision for the city. So we will continue to provide data to service providers to better support families, evaluate, again, we're using our GARE grant to evaluate housing needs and access to those services and resources. And so those activities are taking place now. There's a lot of engagement efforts around a survey that my colleague, Community Investment Manager Dorla Bonner, has been working through. And then lastly, creating a youth master plan to include those youth support services as well. And then lastly, youth development. We heard a lot through our Imagine Kalamazoo efforts about utilizing neighborhood centers, creating neighborhood centers, making sure that there are places of gathering, that there are hubs into the neighborhoods where all kinds of activities can take place and where people can be social again. There were a lot of neighborhoods that told us, you know, we used to have this, or we used to have that, or this school got shut down, and how come we can't use it? And so we've started on a real focus on how we can, again, revitalize these buildings. How does that work? And then how do they become places for the community to gather? And expanding summer offerings for teens, Makers Fair, talent shows, gatherings that bring together different high schools. We've had lots of ideas, and I'm sure more will come out as we explore the idea of that youth master plan as well. Answer any questions?
Commissioner Cunningham?
Thank you, Mayor. So I'm not sure if this is a question directly for you or just,
Sure.
you know, how, you know, although we have priority-based budgeting in IK 2020, how much energy goes into finding match dollars, and how much does that kind of weigh into when or how we invest in these opportunities?
Sure. So kind of depends. We've got Vanessa Collins-Smith, who works on our HUD staff. We've got Steve Brown, who works in the city manager's office as well, who always have on their radars, hey, I know you've got non-motorized priorities. Here's 5 grants I just saw. I also get a lot of community members who know, like, oh, they might be really passionate about trees and know that the DNR has a grant. And we're always looking for those kinds of grants that we can match our FFE funds with to leverage more for impact.
So it's kind of a proactive process where they say, okay, this is coming up in the next few months. These are potential opportunities for grants or funding that's out there and pertaining to X, Y, and Z. Because I know it's, so many different departments, kind of hard question to answer, but that's all I have. Thank you, Mayor.
Other questions? I'm sorry, Vice Mayor?
Thank you. Just a quick one. ETA on the climate action plan?
So I lost my development coordinator, Sarah Jo Shipley, who had really been spearheading the climate action plan. And I am rehiring for that position. I have interviews scheduled for September 18th. In the meantime, Christina Anderson, the city planner, has been coordinating with Paul Manstrom, who is the chair of the Environmental Concerns Committee. And I believe Paul is going to kind of pick up the ball right now and try and finish out the listening sessions that are going to happen this fall. So I'm still hoping for maybe next summer, 2019, over the finish line. But so just know it's always on the forefront of our minds to complete.
Thank you, Madam Director.
Thank you.
Good evening. I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking with you about 2018 Foundation for Excellence funded activities. Quite a few of these we've actually gone through with you before, in particular in our June work session. I just want to touch upon them because certainly we look to the successes and the lessons learned from 18 to help suggest and inform our thinking for 19. So starting off with youth development, we had a really good response from the community in terms of our super recreation program. In many cases, we had sites that were actually turning people away because we didn't have the capacity. That's both a good problem and a bad problem, and so we look to see how we can continue to expand this program to take advantage of what we understand to be a very deep need for parents and also a great experience for youth. With All Things Possible, we had a great partnership with Western. We're able to look at changing locations and being able to look at doing some creative transportation to bring more people into this program. And with My City, we were able to look at kind of serving additional youth and having more of an enriched experience. We're still working with them to tally up the numbers. We understand that more than 350 youth were involved in the employment activities this summer with some more activities as a part of that. In terms of our inviting public places, kind of great neighborhoods and great neighborhoods in terms of parks and great neighborhoods in terms of infrastructure, these projects were really direct responses to Imagine Kalamazoo, in particular the conversations that we heard out in the neighborhoods, people telling us exactly where they wanted to see trees, where they wanted to see trimming, really trying to make sure we're connecting with what we're hearing with immediate action. So we saw some great improvement projects happening in our parks. We saw some great things happening in terms of our streets, and certainly heard from neighborhoods that there was a recognition they could remember being in a meeting in the not too distant past and then seeing actually things happen. And so we think that's helping us build momentum in our partnerships in the neighborhood as we continue on in these neighborhood plan conversations. In terms of economic vitality, this business development fund, a lot of these activities are really intended to complement our work within the neighborhoods. As Rebecca Kick mentioned, we see this master plan, Imagine Kalamazoo, really translating through the neighborhoods so we understand what it means with each individual neighborhood. So we're looking for a strategic site acquisition, working with a Northside Association for Community Development, helping them to acquire a key commercial property to support their senior service campus, looking for the ability to take on commercial properties in nodes that our neighborhoods have identified. This fund and these programs are allowing us to then again take broad goals, understand what they mean by neighborhoods, put resources to them, and see real action happening at the street level. So we've got some good conversations underway about how we set up this pipeline, understanding what it looks like to support entrepreneurs and small business, how we're reaching out to existing partners, and how we can really expand the supports that are available. We talked quite a bit about our partnership with Local Initiative Support Corporation. Certainly in terms of the housing aspect, we really want to make sure we have a balanced approach, certainly balancing the need for both preserving and building new rental, both preserving and building new single-family homes, as well as making sure we're keeping track of the wide variety of needs that our community has across a wide variety of incomes. We've been able to work both with LISC and our housing providers. And the numbers that we're hoping to deliver this year and into the beginning of next year, certainly being 10 homes that we hope to newly construct. As Director Kick mentioned, also working on the idea of rehabilitation and supporting existing homeowners, addressing code violations and maintenance issues, working in partnership with the county to look at how we can prevent foreclosure from happening, how we can help people educate the foreclosure process, and then also how we can support the construction of new multifamily units, as well as helping some of our existing units expand or be able to develop into more, keep them on long term, make sure we're investing in them to keep them long term. As I mentioned earlier, like our economic programs that we're working in within the city, our economic vitality supports here our ability to directly relate to the needs that we're seeing in the neighborhood through the neighborhood plans. We've got a lot of exciting things happening in terms of the ability to expand the financial opportunity center model, looking at really working within the Douglas Community Association as sort of a hub, building on great things that are already happening there, and seeing how we can connect more services and supports to that particular community partner. In partnership with our Community Planning and Economic Development Department, we have LISC working alongside staff to identify a really deep pipeline, understanding who is looking for supports and how do we begin to understand what the needs are and how we can link those needs to supports. One example that came up was in talking with our Small Business Development Center, recognizing that they're at capacity and they can't have the ability to focus on just the city of Kalamazoo. So we're looking in partnership with LISC at being able to provide enough resources for an additional staff person to be added so we can have, as we're drumming up interest and support, we can have additional capacity to make sure people are able to navigate. We also talked about the importance of engaging in activation. As we're going back out to neighborhoods, talking about planning again in the neighborhoods, we need to identify where there's some quick win projects to demonstrate that we really have the ability to act on some of these items. So we're seeing some great projects coming out of Vine in terms of the desire to bring in bike infrastructure, more kiosks, more bike racks. We've got great ideas with Eastside in terms of murals, murals within the downtown. We're seeing opportunities for us to be able to help neighborhoods do additional outreach and engagement so we have good participation in the development of our plans. In addition, as part of our shared prosperity work, we've heard it again and again and again, the importance of listening and making sure that any solutions that we're contemplating are informed with people at the table. And so this has also helped us to do far deeper conversations out into the community. We've also heard, again, the importance of telling the story, making sure people are aware of what's out there. I think last year we presented to you a video that we had done featuring All Things Possible and some of our youth programs. We've been working diligently trying to get more opportunities, tell stories. We've got several videos that are kind of in various stages of helping to highlight the work of Foundation for Excellence. Building on the great response we get from View from the Curb in terms of the newsletter that the city puts out quarterly. We're actually just in the process of sending out a Foundation for Excellence newsletter to really detail to our broader public all of the activities that we've been underway, inviting people to understand what Foundation for Excellence is about, talking about the board and the fact that the board is something that is a representative of our community and looking for people to be actively involved. So really getting a chance to get Foundation for Excellence out there in terms of what these investments are adding up to do. We had conversations certainly at the April meeting about some of the projects that we've been doing. Lead service certainly was a topic of discussion, as people felt like it was very critical for us to continue to invest in the replacement of lead services, certainly looking at reducing the window of time that we think is necessary to make sure that all of our lead service lines are replaced out. So that has been underway, and then certainly our Public Services Department has been very effective in trying to bring in other resources. To Commissioner Cunningham's question, even though we're able to have Foundation for Excellence funding, that doesn't stop staff from continually looking out to say, how can we bring additional resources in to magnify the impact of these lead service replacement dollars. In terms of the downtown, we've had quite a few conversations about things we can do to help activate spaces. So we've been looking at both in terms of Bates Alley, a project that's been talked about for a long time. How do we kind of pull that together and make it a project to really help, again, activate the space? Looking for opportunities to do beautification, particularly around the utility boxes, and how we can look at opportunities to bring artists in and have a way of kind of shaping what the downtown looks like. And then also recognizing we have a lot of pedestrian infrastructure downtown that's in need of maintenance. How do we get a comprehensive look of what's necessary, what we need to do to make sure people can access what they need to, and then begin to address resources accordingly. So in terms of our Foundation for Excellence budget, what we've tried to show you each year is how we look at the programs and the projects that we've worked on and how we try to expand, enhance, and build from that. What you have in front of you in that far column for 2019 in terms of proposed is the recommendations that we have for you. And what you'll see is us building on a lot of the projects that I just detailed. In terms of the great neighborhoods, the infrastructure piece, what we're looking at is an opportunity to continue to do the lead services, as I mentioned. We've heard again and again the importance of sidewalks as we talk to our neighbors, how much they want to be able to safely access places in their area. So we look to be able to put a significant amount of dollars towards sidewalks with the hope of being able to do something in each of the neighborhoods. Again, being able to demonstrate immediate results from the conversations that we've had. As Director Kick mentioned, we're doing quite a bit of tree planting this year. We hear again and again how important that is for people, and so we look to basically enhance and expand that to be able to do 500 trees planted this year, or sorry, in 19. Also the ability to go in and continue to work on tree trimming so that we make sure we've got streetlights that are more visible and that we're able to be able to kind of have that whole streetscape that goes along with these other projects. As part of our neighborhood conversations, we heard a lot about traffic calming, and I know you're all hearing a lot about traffic calming. This infrastructure line includes an idea of being able to respond back to the traffic calming concerns. We're looking at being able to install permanent radar signs that would actually kind of have data to download so we understand what speed activities are out there and be able to show people their speeds. As well as beginning to look at what speed bumps we can install to be able to experiment in some of the key areas that we've heard again and again are problematic for people in the neighborhoods. And then lastly, kind of a new idea of working on a system called Train Info that allows us to be able to basically sensors to determine when trains are coming and then have message systems let people know how they can seek alternate routes. Again, things that I'm sure you've all heard as much as we have. People are having challenges coming in and out of downtown, having problems access. This would allow us to be able to look at some technology that could help people navigate in a little bit more of a predictable way. Moving on down and looking at sort of the parks, great neighborhoods, the parks piece. As I mentioned to you earlier, the super recreation program is something that we've heard a strong need for. And when we look to expand, it really becomes expanding to other sites. We've heard strong desire to have super recreation potentially located on the east side. The strong feeling would be Rockwell Park would be a great location, but it's lacking a structure that makes super recreation possible. So we'd be hoping to bring a structure to Rockwell Park that would not only be an asset to the park in and of itself, but allow us to expand the super recreation program, both increasing our numbers and increasing access for residents living on the east side. We've also been looking at our parks in terms of just assessing where they are and how they can be used. Upjohn Park, for those of you who use it, a boundless playground that we're proud to have in our portfolio, but the surfacing has really been challenged by all the water. And so we're looking at a line item that would allow us to be able to replace the surfacing to the boundless playground, certainly to be able to return it to its intent, which is access to everybody, as well as just kind of spruce things up there. And then lastly, we had some great conversations with our Parks and Recs department and the Edison neighborhood regarding Breed Street Park. I think there's some really good, exciting ideas that came out of it. As we look at what budget we had available and the ideas coming out of the neighborhood, there's a gap in that, and we're hoping to see whether we could use Foundation for Excellence dollars to kind of help respond to resident desires for that site to be able to enhance it a little bit more. Going down into neighborhood engagement and activation, as I stated to you, this has been a huge resource for us to help expand outreach for neighborhood plans, to really help us build our conversations with the community. And what we're hearing loud and clear is a strong desire to help support formally our community leaders in terms of possibilities of trainings and supports. We've had some great conversation with the Kalamazoo Community Foundation about how we might partner together in supporting resident leadership and community leadership development. So we'd hope to expand that a little bit in addition to the listing that we've already been doing. We've also recognized that as we keep going back to folks and making sure we understand what their priorities are, we have to continue to work on quick wins. And so this neighborhood engagement and activation line item would be a way for us to continue to ensure that we have some quick wins for neighborhoods while they're continuing to do the hard work of listening and prioritizing. One of the conversations that certainly came out of our April session was the intent to support the shared prosperity work. As you all know, we had a shared prosperity plan that came before you and was approved earlier this year. And there's a strong feeling that we know there's significant need. We know there's significant work to do. We now have a shared prosperity organizing committee in place. We've got goal teams that are mobilizing. And there's a strong desire to begin to attach resources to help implement this plan, to work in partnership with the structure that's been created to make sure that we are able to actively move on the goals that we've stated and that you all approved. So the proposal includes resources to be able to support shared prosperity, the idea that we establish a line item and then allow for us to work through the organizing committee and the goal teams to make sure that we're able to use those resources in the most impactful ways. Also, something that we came and mentioned to you briefly at the June work session was the idea of a youth mobility fund, and this is something that we've been exploring in partnership with Central County Transportation Authority of what it would take to eliminate fares for youth riding our buses. We hear again and again in our community conversation that transportation is a barrier. We hear again and again the desires for us to be able to have our youth access all of the opportunities here in Kalamazoo. So there's an idea in working in partnership with CCTA, working in partnership with our library and our school system, what would it look like for us to create a system by which our youth could ride the bus for free. So we wanted to also include that as part of a follow-up of those conversations. And lastly, certainly we acknowledge that we've got 4 positions that are supported through Foundation for Excellence. We'd like to continue on in those positions. Although we keep the positions constant, I do believe we're going to be adjusting the amount to make sure it's actually reflecting the cost of staff as it is. I think with that, I will hold and see what kind of questions you all would like to get into.
Thank you. Commissioner Cooney?
When you talk about Rockwood Park, are you talking about a building there?
Yes. So I think the understanding, and certainly I've got our Parks and Rec director here that can go deeper into this, as we talk about the supervised rec program, the idea is by having a structure, you have more flexibility and more ability to deliver services.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So
absolutely. Okay, did you design that yet, or are you still talking about? I mean, what I'm interested in is, would you have like a basketball court in there?
So there's an existing plan for Rockwell Park that I think I can have our director speak to. This would be in addition, and what we're talking now would be potential for 19. So this would be based on conversation. Certainly tonight is an opportunity to get input on these ideas. If this were to be something that would be supported going through the budget process and approved, then it would be something that would actually go forward in 19.
So just to clarify, you've been to Lacrone Park?
Yes.
And there's a structure, and there's a structure at Spring Valley Park. Are we talking that type of structure?
That's my understanding, and certainly if I want clarification, we can have. We'll get the thumbs up from Director Fletcher in the back.
Yeah. There's also, Commissioner, some ongoing conversations that will be happening with the foundation that is interested in a youth center, more youth centers in the community as well.
Yeah.
So there's some potential for really working matching dollars with foundation as well to get at some of those issues.
Yeah, that's what I was hoping to hear.
I figured you were going there.
You know, we had blueprints before for a building there. The problem was staffing, and how were we going to staff it? And I don't know if that's still a problem or not. I mean, they were actually going to put it in the capital improvement budget, but we didn't have an answer on the staffing. Maybe we do have something moving toward that now. I don't know.
So I can clarify this, that the intent was not a structure that would be operated on a kind of ongoing basis. The idea would be with our other sites during the summer as part of supervised rec, that the structure would be accessed. So I think it's certainly, that being said, as I understand it, the structures are being used not just for supervised rec, but I wouldn't want to confuse this with a youth center conversation, which I know has been ongoing. So this would be more of a smaller in scale, but it would be adequate to allow us to offer supervised rec at this site. This is a kind of beginning stage conversation which comes from how might we bring supervised rec to the east side, and certainly is open for thoughts and discussion about how we might accomplish that in different ways.
Commissioner Urban? I did too, but go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to ask how open is the city staff at this point to considering an initiative that hasn't even gotten on here yet at all, but fits with one of the goals, which has to do with, well, it could fit under a complete neighborhood, certainly, and economic vitality. All these things have to do with affordable housing. We already have a commitment from LISC and a partnership with them. And we have already going named in things to do, helping with rehab of existing properties. But something that's come to my attention recently as an approach to dealing with providing long-term permanent affordable housing is a tool called housing land trusts. It's been successfully employed in Burlington, Vermont, and several places that you're probably familiar with. But I haven't heard anybody really talk seriously about the idea of having the community own the land, or a nonprofit own the land, and homeowners own what's built on it. There's some advantages that you're probably aware of, but for the people in the audience, I'm speaking to them as well. This is a way to kind of mitigate the quick profit, build it, take the money and run thing that comes from private development. By this device, you have somebody stationed there all the time who's looking after the long-term viability of the land and whatever is built on it. And there is still, though, the possibility for individual homeowners to reap the capital gains, or at least some of the capital gains that come from property appreciation, which is the big reason why a lot of people still want to buy a house. Is that's an investment that they can understand, that they can maintain and watch grow. It isn't putting it into some financial instrument that is out of sight. I'm wondering if there's a way at this point in the city budget to set out some funding for investigating that tool and applying it to properties that the city owns within Kalamazoo, or vacant properties that may be owned by others that are looking for redevelopment. It doesn't have to be contiguous. It can be separated. I guess I've said enough. Now it comes the question. Is it possible at this point to consider adding something like that to the budget?
I think certainly the opportunity that we have coming before you, early on in the budget process is to solicit ideas. I think particularly on the community land trust, something that we've looked at off and on, and I've sort of been following the Burlington, Vermont example, and that's the one that I get most excited about because they have such an interesting portfolio, from home ownership and single-family houses to co-ops to apartments to condos. One of the things that I'm learning in conversations I've had is they work really well in hot markets. And I think as I've asked the question more in sort of Midwestern, a little bit of your legacy cities, how they fared, and they haven't fared as well. That doesn't mean that we're not afraid to try new things. I think when you look at the benefit of a community land trust and what it allows, it can create opportunities for home ownership that wouldn't otherwise be possible. One of the other things I love about that is the idea that you can have affordable units in perpetuity, which we know can really help protect against issues of displacement. So I think the question becomes, can the land trust work in a city like Kalamazoo? And I think we've been doing some conversation on that. But the other question is, if it doesn't work as well in our type of market, are there other mechanisms that might get us to the same end? So lease purchase program, for example, which can reduce some of the barriers for home ownership and spread them out over time. Looking at restrictions of deeds in terms of what you can do to try to keep income levels so constant. So I think the short answer is definitely want to continue to explore that as a model. In terms of an allocation, I think it's something that, the research itself, something we've been kind of doing underway. Certainly we could put more energy into it. It's actually on our Imagine Kalamazoo plan, as Director Kick is pointing out. So I think that there's a resource piece in terms of, a resource piece in terms of research, and then there's a resource piece in terms of supporting it. And I think that would be, for us to grapple with. I do know in Burlington they started with a fairly decent, significant investment from the city initially, but because of their portfolio, it is actually and somewhat self-sustaining in that they're able to sell at profit and actually reinvest it. And you can, for those of you familiar with our market here, that can become a little bit of a challenge in terms of always looking at turning profit when you're selling land.
Well, I'm asking that because short of doing something like that, relying on the private sector to do this is even more remote because they expect higher profits even faster. So if we can't even do it with lower returns on investment and longer payback times, then we're really in trouble. And all the people who are looking for affordable housing in one way or another, we're basically saying we're out of ideas, because one that is more viable than just asking or expecting AVB to come in here and do some big project. Well, what's the alternative? I mean, I'm trying to press you a little bit on, is there more we can do that we can actually, before we can do, we have to do some research. And when you say that, for example, you said that community land trusts, housing land trusts, don't work so well or work well in hot markets, and so what do we have to do to make Kalamazoo a hot market? I mean, Burlington didn't just naturally become a hot market by itself. What did the city do to make it a hot market? That's what I want to hear. I think that we're going to have to be more determined to be creative here, because there's a whole lot of people in the park right now who are expecting us to do that, and I don't have any good long-term solutions for them, and before we can expect any satisfaction from them, we're going to have to demonstrate to everybody in our community that we have some serious alternatives that we are at least exploring. So I'm still asking for a commitment to have some line item in all these goal maps that particular vehicle is at least being investigated.
I think I got from Director Kick, certainly it's called out as one of the things we want to explore. What comes to mind, earlier this year we came before you with the Dr. Light grant opportunity that was really intended to help us explore best practices related to issues around poverty, and certainly among them chiefly housing. And so one thing that comes immediately to mind is we're trying to hone in on where we want to really dive in and look at best practices. Certainly community land trusts, one of the things that's on our list that we're looking into right now independently, could be something that we push in and to more elevate it to a higher level.
I'd like to see that.
Okay.
Other questions? Commissioner Cunningham.
I got a few statements. So obviously I'm passionate about the east side of Kalamazoo. I want to see a youth center. There's been a lot of conversation in the community, I would say in the last 3 years since I've become a city commissioner and served in different capacities, just around bringing the youth center back. We had one at one time, and I think a lot of people who were able to engage that youth center, although it was small, had a lot of benefit from it. I like the idea of the super rec because I think it provides an alternative that might be more feasible versus the youth center. But I would encourage the city to meet with some of our community partners to see what staffing opportunities are there. Maybe we can create some style of an infrastructure that might be able to support or create some type of funding, one-to-one dollars or something that could potentially grow in that space. Also want to go on the record, I've had conversation with Director Fletcher and Jim in regards to Rockwell Park. They are currently redoing Rockwell Park. A couple things I was concerned with. One being the basketball courts will no longer have a full court. It will be a half court setup, and they are moving the courts from one side. If you know anything about Rockwell Park, it has a street down the middle of the park. And they're moving the actual courts to the other side of the park, opposite of the playground. My concern is our youth. Well, two things. One, I know how impactful that basketball court was on my life and the ability to go out and have a full court run. I think because of the lack of upkeep in the last 5 to 10 years, a lot of the traffic that was in that space has moved down to Mayor's Riverfront Park. So I want to say a couple things in that space. One, I reached out and did a lot of community engagement around this, and there were people who were very passionate about keeping it a full court, but surprisingly there were a lot of people who were, okay with it being a half court, even those who actually play ball. And the only reason why I don't think I gave as much pushback in that capacity was because we had an alternative, and typically if you run in full court, you're of age to travel down to the Mayor's Riverfront Park. So that's that part of the conversation. The other part of the conversation is we're separating the actual basketball court from the playground, for which I think a lot of youth will be crossing back and forth on that street. Which has kind of a built-in danger. We spoke with Director Baker, and he or the conversation, and I can't, give direct dialogue to it, but the conversation said that we're going to provide, additional signage to say slow down, children in play, X, Y, and Z. So something to bring that that enlightenment there. Let me see. I wrote down a bunch of different things. Another thing that I want to kind of highlight, we've been having issues within our community in regards to, I hate the term, but an X-train or pop-up parties in certain areas. I also want to encourage the city to really look into opportunities where we can get our youth engaged and our young adults engaged during high hours of criminal activity. So one of my ideas is Midnight League basketball. There's quite a few actual individuals in the community who are, looking to bring that opportunity here. One being Galilee Baptist Church, and I know that they aren't going to bring it until after they build a new gym in their space. There are a couple other individuals that I know I'll bring to your table, Jim. But yeah, I want to just encourage the city and the public to really engage on youth and young adult opportunities to try and bring that forth and have conversation around that. Let me make sure I kind of wrote down random notes here and there. And I think those are all it. So not really any questions, but just comments on, to go on record in regards to concern and comments on, opportunity I think we can capitalize on.
Thank you, Commissioner. Other commissioners? Thank you, AC and Land.
We actually have Melissa Fuller, our Deputy Management Services Director, coming up to present the last piece on next steps.
Thank you. Mr. Manager, do we have are we talking CIP or capital improvements program at all?
Not this evening.
Not this evening, okay, thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, Commission. I know you guys have heard a lot of stuff this evening, especially as it pertains to the different initiatives that we're talking about with OpenGov and Open Data and everything that Director Kick and ACM Lamb have talked about. So what are the next steps? Here we're going to talk about what are the next steps for the 2019 budget calendar. What can we see and what are the initiatives that we're going to be able to pull in? So on September 4th, we did have a budget kickoff meeting with the various departments, kind of telling them where we're going with the OpenGov and the budgeting module. Moving on to September 10th, this evening, presenting this to you, telling you that we're moving toward the OpenGov solutions, so that way we can help you, keep you informed as well as the departments, trying to keep all those initiatives that Jennifer talked about earlier. On October 12th, we're looking to have the departments and their budgets due to the budget office for their tech review to make sure that the stories and the numbers are matching. Because as Jennifer indicated, we're looking for the stories, not just the numbers, but the stories, making sure that they make sense to each other. On October 19th, Jennifer's staff will be done with their review. And then there'll be a commission work session. That is a new one that we're putting in this year. So October 29th is a work session just like tonight, where we'll have more information as it pertains to the 2019 budget and where we are. November 2nd, the CMO will have their review complete, so that way we can start to build the budget information and the budget books. CMO, sorry.
Oh.
Sorry.
No, but can you say what it means? City manager's office.
Yes, city manager's office,
Thank
yes. CMO review, so city manager's office will be reviewing all the budgets and their submissions to make sure that we're making sure that all of the goals and initiatives that we've discussed are being hit. On November 21st, the proposed budget will be submitted. That means it'll be posted to the city website and be distributed to everybody here as well. The charter deadline is actually December 1st. We have scheduled right now that the public hearing will be on December 17th for public input on the recommended budget, and then the budget to be adopted on January 21st, 2019.
Any questions on the
Any
schedule?
questions?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Manager?
That's it for our budget presentation this evening. Appreciate the discussion and look forward to working on this through the fall with everyone.
Any questions for the city manager? Thank you. I'll now open it up for citizens' comments on any item this evening. Step to the podium. You'll have 4 minutes. Give us your name and whether you live within the city. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Carl Wiseman. I currently reside in Bronson Park, and we are still waiting on the city to discuss our demands.
Thank you. Good evening.
My name's Arthur Morlock. I live in Bronson Park. We're currently waiting for the city to address our demands. Thank you.
Good evening. Thank you.
My name is Heather Sadler. I live at Bronson Park, and we're still waiting on the city to meet our demands.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Faith Valistra. I as well currently reside at Bronson Park with Occupy Kalamazoo, and we are still waiting to hear some sort of word on our demands to be met.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Jessica Decker. I currently reside in Bronson Park, and we are currently waiting on our demands to be discussed.
Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Frank Murray. I live in Cooper Township, but 19 years I lived in the city of Kalamazoo. In 25 and a half years, I was employed by the city of Kalamazoo. I'm just an old retiree. I come here on a little different mission than most of it. I came here to thank you commissioners and Mayor Hopewell for your the sacrifices that you make on a weekly basis. I have no idea, but I could guess how many hours of a week that you people spend serving your community. A lot of hours that goes unnoticed. And it's certainly not about the money, because you're not going to get rich doing it, but it's because you care about your community and how your community, how it works, how it goes. I just want to thank you for being willing to serve your community in such a fashion. Related to that, it strikes me that somewhere along the line, civility is suffered. And I think that you, Mayor Hopewell, and commissioners are entitled to the same respect and dignity that you show everyone who comes before this microphone. I've been here before on various other reasons, and everybody that I've seen come to this microphone is treated with respect and dignity, and that's huge. And I think that you people are entitled to the same respect and dignity that you show everybody else that comes to this microphone. One little additional thought. Somewhere following all of this upheaval going on, whether it be on the radio or on television or in the news, in the papers, it came out that there's 100 empty beds. From the director of the Gospel Mission says there's 100 empty beds at the Gospel Mission. Now, I don't know that that's the permanent solution, but I'm thinking that as a temporary solution, if there are 100 beds at that Gospel Mission, they could be used as a temporary solution while you work out something more permanent. You got a bed, you got a roof over your head, you got 3 meals a day, you've got a shower, you've got bathrooms to go to the bathroom, and it just seems to me that in a simple society, even if it's not permanent, you've got a temporary solution looking right in front of you. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Mia Henry. I live in the Stewart neighborhood. I am an FFE member, board member as well. I would just like to say in response to the last person who spoke that just keep in mind that the Gospel Mission is not welcoming to everyone at all, and it is not the best place for people who are looking for homes to be. So I wanted to just express some frustration I have, and it's just around, I'm hoping that we can figure out how FFE board members can be more involved in the setting of the priorities for the budget or how the budget is coming along. I know that it's new and we're still trying to figure that out, but I don't know, I feel like right now we're just, you know, faces. And we're not really, you know, able to be of use. So it's frustrating to me because I don't like being in positions where I don't feel like I can be useful. So I would hope that we can figure that out sooner than later. I also wanted to express solidarity with the people in Bronson Park, and I wanted to just ask the commission if there is going to be another meeting soon to address the demands that they have. I don't know if you can answer that, but I do want to ask that before this meeting ends. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Okay, after last time, I wanted to make sure we reset it. My name's Zachary Laster. I live in the city of Kalamazoo. I live in Stewart, but I've been hanging out quite a bit lately with some new friends in Bronson Park. I would love to see this body address their demands, at least publicly have that conversation. I think they're owed that. I think anyone who petitions their government to have with some demands is owed a conversation at least, and not just silence. I also want to thank the community of Kalamazoo for their generous, you know, helping them out and making sure they have porta potties to use and tents and blankets and clothing and, you know, warm weather wear as it gets colder, while the city of Kalamazoo frankly does nothing. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
My name is Jake Andrews. I live within the city. I'm also the chair of the Kalamazoo County Democratic Party. I know this board is nonpartisan, but I am sure many of you up here share a lot of the values that the Democratic Party hopes to stand by. I'm here to express solidarity with those in Bronson Park. I'm not even saying you guys need to come up with a solution, have a discussion. They deserve that. They've been working so hard, out there organizing on a daily basis. They deserve a conversation. They deserve that. I don't have the answer, but they deserve that conversation at least from their elected officials. So that's all I'd like to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wanting to address the commission this evening? Seeing no one, we are commissioners' comments. Commissioner Sykes.
Yeah, so you guys know my name already, but I want to reiterate, I am still residing in the Bronson Park Freedom Encampment, organized with Occupy Kalamazoo, and I am also still waiting for the city to respond to the demands of the people. Additionally, I would like to invite the gentleman from Cooper Township, if he'd like. There's a young girl named Mackenzie, very young, living in the encampment, whose parents brought her and her brother over so that we could find them tents to stay in because there were not enough beds and the children were sleeping on the floor in the hallway as people went past. And one of the things that the children hold on to sleep at night is their stuffed animal. And I'm sure, as you can imagine, being displaced from your home, you need those comfort items you're used to. Unfortunately, they are not allowed to sleep with those as they lay on a mat this thick in the hallway. They're not allowed to have their stuffed animals. So I'm glad to say we were able to get them a little bit thicker surface to sleep on and a tent, and they now have their stuffed animals to sleep with. I'd also invite you to come to the encampment and meet the folks, like the person living there with epilepsy, who cannot be housed at the mission because the mission is not equipped to handle their medical issues. And so they live in the park with us as well. So there are lots of other cases like that, and I absolutely invite you to come here, talk to folks, learn more about their situation, and perhaps walk some of those folks who are not medically allowed to be at the mission over there to discuss with them why that is. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Anderson. Commissioner Cooney.
I would like to take my time tonight to honor one of our colleagues who died very suddenly about a week and a half ago, Todd Pryor. Todd Pryor provided excellent service to the community. He was the community's forester. Frank would know him very, very well. He always did his job. He always did it with a smile. He was an expert in his field, knew so much about trees and about forestry. And the thing about him was he always did it with a smile. And when people were upset, he would go to their house and sit down and talk with them. And before he left, they were his friend. He used to be a union representative, and he was tremendously popular with the workers, his fellow workers and sister workers. He was just a great human being, and we were blessed to have him here in the community, and I'd just like to honor him tonight.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Irvin.
Thank you, Mayor Hopewell. You recall at the last City Commission meeting during Commissioner's time, I raised the question about the City Commission taking a formal position of support for what the city manager is doing, or give him some direction that's formal and on the record that will put him in good stead with the elected officials and the community that we all represent. It's with a strong city manager, weak city commission form of government, it's very easy for the city commissioners to hide behind the city manager and let the city manager do all the heavy lifting and the difficult decision-making, when really what he or she, as the case may be, needs is a firm backing from his superiors, which are us. At that last meeting, it was the end of the meeting. It was not really appropriate to have a discussion then, and it's probably not appropriate to have a discussion now because this particular item wasn't on tonight's agenda. However, I am hoping that it will be on the next City Commission agenda. If it's not there, there'll probably be some people who have the power to put it on the agenda, and we'll have a discussion about it. This is basically to get clarity, to give the city manager clarity on what we expect him to do, what he can do and what he can't do. I think it'd be helpful for all of us to know that. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Cunningham.
Do we have a list of those demands here?
I was emailed them early this afternoon. I didn't have time to share it with you, so I can do so.
Okay. Let me think. If there was a motion to move this discussion forward, would you have access to bring that here now? I would like to motion that we have a discussion concerning the list of demands from the encampment.
We have a motion from Commissioner Cunningham to have a discussion. Is there support?
Support.
Supported by Commissioner Sykes. We are in discussion mode. Commissioner Anderson.
Go ahead.
We need these.
I'm a little confused just about where we at here. Were you asking for a list?
In order to have a discussion, I think that the list has to be present. And if there is one available, at least it could be provided to us as commissioners and we can have further deliberation. So I don't know if I was supposed to add that into the motion that it be provided and then discussed, or?
No, you didn't need that. Commissioner Quinn?
I would like to know, are these different demands than were presented to us before, or are they the same demands, or different ones? Okay. Sure, I would be glad to discuss them.
Yeah, let's do that. Commissioners, we're going to take a 5-minute recess so the manager can take care of getting that distributed. Yeah, we can still take a vote before the vote. Yeah. Bye. Deputy Manager Moore, could you ask the others to come back in? I guess that was a long 5 minutes. We're reconvened. We are in discussion mode. Oh, we need a vote. I'm sorry, excuse me. Any further discussion on the motion? Clerk Borling, please call the roll.
Commissioner Cooney?
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham?
Yes.
Commissioner Sykes?
Yes.
Commissioner Urban?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Knott?
No.
Mayor Hopewell?
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson?
Yes.
Thank you, Commissioners. Motion carried. Commissioner Cunningham?
All right. First, I just wanted to clarify that these are the demands. There are 5. The first one speaks to having an open public dialogue. The second speaks to immediate and thorough investigation of alleged abuses occurring at Kalamazoo Gospel Mission. The third is mental, emotional, and physical health supports for the residents of the encampment. Fourth, the structurally sound vacant building that BPFE members can coordinate volunteer contract services for in order to get the property up to code in time to move in before snow falls. And then 5, the city of Kalamazoo to utilize the expertise of our members and national best practices to develop a long-term housing first policy and program that better addresses the issues of homelessness in the future.
Commissioner Urban?
I have a suggestion about how to proceed with this. Since the city manager and his staff have been working quite closely with the details of some aspects of what is needed here, I think it would be prudent for us to get a report from the city manager about what actions have been or initiatives have started on these things, because a number of things I know have at least been attempted to address at least some of these. And so for us to start from a position of knowledge, I suggest that we ask the city manager to prepare a report on each of these items, what the status of them is currently, and what his recommendation is for further action, so that we can either approve it, endorse it, or reject it, or change it. In every case where the answer is not something the city can do by itself, we're going to have to involve allies and helpers, and known and as yet unknown. So it's perfectly okay for the city manager to suggest what the city could do next to engage the wider community, because traditionally social services are something that's handled by the state and by the county and not by the city. The city usually concentrates its efforts on property and infrastructure for just, but clearly this is the place where they meet, because we're talking about property and living, and here we are. So to summarize, I move, just to move things along, now that we have this item in front of us, I move that the commission request the city manager to give us a report on the status of these items and what his recommendations are for us to endorse or reject.
A motion by Commissioner Urban. Is there support? So, is there support? There's no support. So, Commissioner, I think that doesn't need a motion. I mean, okay. We're on. if the manager is prepared to address these, we can just ask him to address them, knowing that he only got them this afternoon. So,
Yeah, well,
so is the question you're asking him to address the items?
Well, let me just clarify a little bit. It was my intention to give him at least until our next regular meeting to prepare the report. Clearly, we're not ready to discuss this tonight. We don't have the facts in front of us.
Well, so Commissioner, I just want to make sure, if we weren't prepared, we had a motion and a support that said we were prepared, and it was supported by that. So if we're going to have a discussion, then if the manager is prepared to address these items, or as he's being asked, then he should do that. And if he doesn't have an answer, that's the answer. So again, I don't think we need a report. I'm just going to ask him to go through the items and talk about things that involve him or our office or what have you, and then we can go from there.
Well, then may I reply?
Sure.
Well, if the city manager is comfortable doing that right now, that's all the good, all the better. But I would think that since he just got this latest report, this latest set of demands this afternoon, I'm at least giving him the opportunity to have more time to prepare a well thought out, thorough, comprehensive reply.
Right, and again, we can ask him if he's ready. If he's not ready, he can tell us that and go from there. So I'm going to give it to the manager. You have the floor if you want to dive into these, if you're prepared, and then we'll go from there.
Sure. Again, you're right, I did receive these this afternoon at our meeting at noon. So what we have going on right now is a work group around with all the providers that are associated with homelessness at the table to talk about solutions. We met last Wednesday and talked through or solicited from them their basic immediate needs, and we went through those, and we got together as the work group, came up with some options for meeting those needs. Those were rejected, and we've been working. We met again last Friday to talk about an alternate location, which is what they were also asking for. We came up with one, and that was rejected. So we met again today, and that's when I received the list of new demands. I can go through individually and, just speak to each. Some, we can't obviously solve right now or in the next week or two or month, but I can highlight those. So the first one is having an open public discussion regarding the demands. I don't know if this is it or not, but second one is an immediate and thorough investigation of the alleged abuses occurring on site at the Gospel Mission. We need to look into that more. It's unclear whether they receive public support or not, and if they do, there might be some way to investigate some of the allegations. Whether that's the city of Kalamazoo or not, we don't know yet. Depends whose jurisdiction that would be, whether it's federal or state or local. If it's local, we obviously can investigate criminal acts. So if there are criminal allegations, that they just need to be reported to public safety, and those would be investigated. The next one is immediate access to mental, emotional, physical health supports for residents of the encampment. This one's tricky because there's a lot of support in place. Now, one thing I've learned, and I think a lot of folks around the work group have learned from our homeless folks that are here, are where some of the gaps are. And we can certainly work on those gaps. I think that's a good thing for the work group to focus on. Obviously, there are systems in place already across this whole spectrum, mental, emotional, physical. Whether those are adequate, I think that's what we have to work through. And we do have folks that are already in the system, and we need to be mindful of them as well. Homeless individuals not associated with this encampment that are currently in the system, and keep them in mind as far as where they are in the process and then where these demands come in and intersect with that. Next one is a structurally sound vacant building where they can coordinate volunteer contractor services in order to get the property up to code in time to move in before snow falls. So this one is also tricky. As far as vacant buildings go, the city, we'd have to identify, I can't think off the top of my head any vacant buildings we own that would satisfy this demand. There's certainly vacant buildings out there that may be owned by other parties, private parties, but that again would be a matter of those private parties deciding to work towards what their demand is. So, you know, we certainly can help facilitate some of that, but again, the city, we're not in the position to have identified any vacant buildings that are structurally sound. There's a lot of buildings out there that are not structurally sound, so you know, finding that particular category of building may be difficult. But again, we're willing to work on that, and I think that's been part of our discussions as well. The final one, the City of Kalamazoo utilized the expertise of our members and national best practices to develop a long-term Housing First policy and program that better addresses the issue of homelessness in the future. I think that's a great item that our work group can work on. When we met last Wednesday, we kind of sorted things out between short-term, immediate needs, and what's long-term. And I think we all agreed that there are longer-term strategies that we can work on. Everyone at the table, in terms of service providers and representatives of the encampment, are willing to work together on this until we get it figured out. And you know, that's our commitment to do that. But it's got to be with that work group, as a city, we don't have a lot of capacity to provide direct service to folks. We have a wonderful capacity of getting folks to the table and talking about these, and that's really the position we're in right now. And so that's off the top of my head right now, you know, my response to these five.
Thank you.
Commissioner Sykes.
Yeah, so I do want to say, I believe that we have been able to cross off number one because we are having a public discussion about this. And what I like about us now talking about this is I think it makes it easier to see how, I don't want to say easy, but how doable a solution is and how close we can come to making an agreement even now. I'd like to, you know, with all due respect, I do appreciate the work, City Manager Ritzma, that you've been doing. I do appreciate the number of meetings that folks have shown up to meet with members of the encampment. But I think the frustrating thing for me, who, you know, as you know, I've sat in and listened to all these meetings, the frustrating thing for me is that until now, nobody's gotten a clear response to these demands. What, you know, and I hear you saying you just got them today. I'd like to point out that none of these are new. These are all things that, you know, this group has been asking for from the beginning. We received the feedback that the demands were confusing, they weren't really clear, and so they've been cleared up, but they are not different. And in every single one of those gatherings, I have heard each one of these items lifted up and asked about. So I do just want to say that, you know, I understand you got this specifically today, written in this way and in this order, but these are all items that have been discussed over the last couple weeks. And there hasn't really been a response to that because the first priority of the work group and of, the city manager's office has been to first move folks to a different location. That was not their priority, that was our priority. And then we could talk about these things. And what these folks have said is that, no, we want to talk about this first, and then we can talk about moving to another location. So I just wanted to clarify that. I think this is great. I'm glad we're talking about it. I will say I agree, that we can always investigate criminal abuse complaints. There are many folks who have said that they have spoken directly to KDPS officers and yet never had themselves taken seriously. I would suggest a really easy thing to do would maybe be, to send an officer out or two to specifically take reports of the criminal abuses that folks are alleging have happened. And that's the first step to opening an investigation, right? And we know that we have that capability now. And we know that that's something we would do no matter what with any private organization. I am interested, though, to see if there are any public funds there, because I do think there are other things that are not criminal but are not ethical. So that's an entirely different conversation. I absolutely appreciate and respect that items 3 and 4 require partners. I especially respect that number 3 is not, that's not what we do as a city. Commissioner Urban and I spoke about this earlier today, actually. That's not what we do as a commission, and our voices carry a lot of weight. So if we are reaching out to agencies to say, hey, we got this encampment, we got folks out here who need help, folks out here without access to their medications, we may get a little bit further, given the fact that we have a title. So I think that's something we can help with. Number 4, I was glad to hear there was some openness in the work group with the service providers to start thinking about where there might be a structurally sound building or homes. We also do have members in the community who are also trying to pool resources to make that happen. So I think one way or another, as long as we all move quickly, we can get folks under a roof soon. And then finally, I absolutely agree. A Housing First program and plan is going to be a long-term project. It is, to make sure we do it right. And I think, we all realize that. We all realize that. We all accept that. There's no argument there. So I just wanted to lift those things up and suggest that I don't think these items are a hard thing to do or to agree to help with. Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Weisman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to start by saying I agree with Commissioner Sykes in that the majority of these demands submitted today we saw a week or so ago. There's been some tweaks at admission of one demand in particular, but we saw these when they were submitted to the city clerk's office on a Monday or Tuesday a little bit ago. And it was my understanding that when those demands were submitted and we didn't take them up at our last business meeting, it was in part because a work group had been established and that work group was meeting on last Wednesday. And it's my understanding that there were 3 meetings on Wednesday, an additional meeting on Friday, followed by a meeting today. And I got to tell you, my saying no tonight was in part because I don't think that I'm equipped to really dive into the meat of these demands. To have so far the conversation that we're having feels appropriate. But to get into the weeds, I don't have the expertise or the understanding of what it's going to take to get to some of these more intermediate and long-term demands. And that's what I think that the role of the city of Kalamazoo is to build relationships and to leverage those resources. And that's who's been in the room, as far as I understand, during these work group meetings. Folks from multiple jurisdictions, because as a reminder, the city of Kalamazoo is seated in the county of Kalamazoo. And this is not a city of Kalamazoo problem exclusively. We need to be forcing the arm of our counterparts at the county and all the municipalities that make up this county to come to the table and to help us provide solutions to homelessness in our community. And so again, the work group probably isn't perfect yet. I know in a conversation with the city manager last week, we were missing a key partner, and that partner was the Department of Health and Human Services. The state of Michigan has to be at the table. A number of the challenges that the homeless community faced to date are at the hands of our state government, with cuts to mental health, cuts to substance abuse funding, cuts to the Veterans Affairs Department, and a number of those initiatives run through our county government. So again, I'm open to having this conversation, to continue to charge the city manager and his team to have additional meetings, to dig into the weeds, to find the experts in the, make sure all the experts are in the room, as well as the folks that are living this day in and day out, because they truly are the validators of the experiences on the streets. Thank you.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Just to add, because we're here for open discussion, like I said, I feel I agree. Demand number one was met. An immediate and thorough investigation of the alleged abuses occurring on site at the Kalamazoo Gospel Mission. There was someone who spoke to it earlier in regards to access to the Gospel Mission. I just want to clarify for the community at large that I don't think it's an issue of necessarily them having standards. They may have a standard of you have to read the Bible before you eat. They, you know, barring that we have government dollars that's going into them, you know, they act as their own entity, and if their board says that's okay, then that's between them and their funders. And I don't understand, and also with the Gospel Mission, you know, if they have a rule of, you know, a hand between, you know, mats, you know, I don't know what the reason is for. If they're removing, you know, dowels from an individual being able to sleep, you know, they're working over at the psychiatric hospital. It was not uncommon to have that in place just because of a potential sleeping danger. Or even when you're dealing with psychiatric patients who might be swallowers, they might grab something that, and so I don't know to what degree, you know, even shoelaces were prohibited in a lot of spaces just because of potentially, you know, hanging yourself. But what I wanted to say is I don't think that's, you know, for some people that is a concern who are homeless because they don't want to meet those rules, but I think more so what I've been hearing is there's some cultural issues in regards to how people are being treated. Talking to individuals from other shelters, I've heard that, you know, they want to open up a shelter that's more like a hotel, where it's more accommodating in that capacity. To what degree that's between the Gospel Mission and them to make that decision, I'm not sure that that's something that we can, you know, leverage or even impose. But and we're not taking any action items, but my advice is just that continue to work with the citizens, and I don't expect, I just expect the open communication continue. Immediate access to mental and emotional and physical health supports for residents of the encampment. I think that's kind of out of our capacity. That's a huge lift for those who want to battle that. I think that's definitely on a federal level. Obviously, the state has some impact on it and some say in it, but I think on a much grander scheme of things, we're talking about a huge financial lift. And, you know, once again, open communication. How can we, you know, keep that dialogue going? Fourth, the structurally sound vacant building. You know, that goes back into financial feasibility. You mentioned some legal areas and even, you know, to what capacity. Once again, open communication is my expectation, Jim. And then, I'm sorry, City Manager Ritzma. The City of Kalamazoo utilized the expertise of our members and national best practices to develop a long-term housing first policy and program that better addresses the issues of homelessness in the future. I think the biggest thing about this, this encampment has, one, highlighted other leaders in the community who can actually come to the table who are from this homeless community. And I think it has opened up the continued dialogue and communication. When I had the opportunity to speak to a lot of the homeless, my continuous statement is utilize the positive energy, keep the dialogue open, keep the communication going. That's the same thing that I'm going to advise to our city manager is, you know, there will be times where we'll say no. At the end of the day, we still have to have continued communication. And that's all I have to say in regards to these 5 demands. But the main thing is continue that dialogue and move on from there.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner.
Thank you, Mayor Hopewell. going back to item number 2, I think we need some clarity on whether these abuses are ethical lapses or criminal matters. It seems to me that if there's a criminal abuse that's going on, physical abuse that's actionable, that can be in any private property. The police can go in and have domestic abuse. The police have the ability to go in and break that up and try to mitigate whatever is happening. So if there's criminal level of abuse going on, the fact that the gospel mission is private property is no barrier to our looking into it. But the thing is, I expect a lot of stuff that we're dealing with, by no means all, has to do with how people are treated. The quality of public life depends on us being courteous and polite to one another. And it's pretty clear that many people are not receiving that kind of politeness. And as a consequence, some of us up here aren't receiving it either. But we recognize that comes with the territory. So my point about this is, besides all these things that are specific, I hope that the quality of the relationship will gradually improve to the point where people can recognize that people who are distressed in this community are approachable. You can talk to them. You don't need to run from them. You can learn from them. I'm experiencing some of that right now, and it's challenging and also, well, it's kind of personal, but I guess there's a subtext to these demands, and it has to do with treating people with dignity and respect. Everything that we do, so far, what I've witnessed, I've seen that, but I've heard many stories of where it hasn't happened. So I really can't tell on anybody else, but I have to believe what people have told me. What I have personally witnessed, though, has been really, except for people interrupting one another, have been really pretty good. And so I just want to let the whole public out there who are watching on TV or wherever, that the fear factor, we can take down a bunch of notches by just being brave enough to recognize that these are our people who live in our community. They're a part of our community too.
Mr. Kuhn?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I think the people that slept in the park did a great service to the community, because I think you put this issue on the table in a way that hadn't been on the table before, and you created a sense of urgency. So I think you won. Now, I think we're ready to come to grips with the problem. People are at the table, and what we need is a comprehensive solution. And that's not going to come next week. But you folks have to be at the table, and other people that are homeless have to be at the table. The people that are couch surfing. One of my friends is a freshman football coach at Kalamazoo Central. And one of the kids on his team doesn't have a place to live. He couch surfs. 14-year-old kid. We need people like that. We need people that are living in apartments which were meant for one family and 2 or 3 families in there. We need them at the table. And we shouldn't rush to a solution. I agree that housing first is where we need to go. We need to think it through. We need to be smart. How do we get there? So I think now is the time that we can come together. I see the providers at the table. I think the Vice Mayor is right. It's not just the city's problem. It's the county's problem. It's the state's problem. And it's the federal government's problem, who is giving tax breaks to the richest people in the country and not putting any money into these problems that you lay out here. People should have access to the physical and mental health services that they need. So we have to work towards that.
Commissioner Anderson?
Thanks, Mayor. I mean, generally speaking, I agree with comments people are making. I really appreciate the comments made by Commissioner Cunningham, so I won't reiterate all that. Just to add something new to the conversation, though, I have been in most of the meetings that have occurred, work group sort of meetings, after work group sort of meetings, and I think that I want to give a lot of credit to our city manager, who has been entirely sincere every day, demonstrated his deep ethical principles, his desire to be of service to everyone in the city of Kalamazoo, devoted a great deal of time to this, attempting to be effective, attempting to accept the responsibility that the city can accept, and yet pull together resources in town in areas where there might be more focus or more funding specifically related to these and other demands that have, risen and diminished over the course of these conversations. So I just want to say thank you, Manager Ritzma. It's obviously not an easy situation, and quite frankly, if you look from one coast to another in this country, there is really no place that has solved this problem. And unfortunately, whatever we might say, that is not going to be, unless we build a wall around the city of Kalamazoo and say, you cannot come or go, we're going to solve our own problems here, we will have a very challenging time solving our problem, because it is, people move around in this country, there is no limitation on that, and it is the case that we will find ourselves attempting to solve a national problem here. And so I think part of this is advocacy on the national level. Certainly the case that funding for housing under the McKinney-Vento Act, which was specifically created to address the needs of persons who might be experiencing houselessness, has been diminishing over the last administration, and now that has continued into this administration. So a variety of difficult pieces here, but as far as locally doing the best job we can and trying to address it in just a forthright, straightforward, collaborative manner, I think our city manager has exemplified that, and I really appreciate that. Manager Arisma, I appreciate your efforts, and I guess at this point, relative to all these things, which are in some ways, to some extent, kind of higher level requests, I'm still, my inclination is to find a specific, discrete task, something that we can do today or next week or something along those lines that has an immediate effect, beneficial effect on people's situations. I'm really hoping that we can filter down from this a bit and identify some of those things. And I know some of our discussions started with those kinds of things. Let's say something as simple as a cooler, for example, which when you look at these requests, I mean, that seems very modest in comparison, but in some ways, those kinds of things, not suggesting that, but those kinds of more immediate and practical and accomplishable in the short term kinds of goals, I think we still need to be able to circle around back to that and see what those things might be. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Sykes?
Yep. So I'll go back to my original statement. I understand that some of the alleged abuses are ethical and not criminal, but I have heard from folks that there have been things that have happened that were criminal. And so I think, again, I think that's a simple thing that we can do. I think that's a simple thing we can do tonight, is just take reports and start investigating And, you know, maybe, you know, KDPS doesn't find anything. But I don't think it's to ask a lot to ask for an investigation. I guess what I want to say is I hear everybody, and I'm really appreciative to hear everybody, you know, sort of in support, but say, you know, acknowledging that, like, we don't have absolute control over any of this, right? The service providers that are at the table with the work group are necessary in this. But I do think for Jim's purposes or City Manager Ritzma's purposes, it would be helpful for us as a body to at least formally acknowledge that we support him in going through each line item as best he can. Again, I think that, you know, we've already knocked out number 1. We can knock out number 2 tonight. Every one of us up here can commit to making some phone calls tomorrow and hope that means that some folks show up in the park, you know, and then we've done our due diligence, and, you know, we can tell Jim that, you know, this is the direction we hope you will try to go in, understanding that, you know, maybe number 4, maybe that doesn't happen and something else happens instead. But I think at the end of the day, and housing first policy sounds like all of us are on board with that. We just got to figure out how to do it using best practices. And so you know, I think all folks really need to hear is that we support the city manager exploring and moving through these items, the 4 that are left, and that we'll continue talking about it, continue being transparent. I will likely be continuing to come with these folks to those work group meetings. But I think that's all we need to do. And so I would like to move that we have a vote of the commission in saying exactly what I just said, that we support the city manager in moving through these demands as listed, and understanding that he will at times have to come back to us and say, that doesn't work, but this will work.
We have a motion by Commissioner Sykes, supported by Commissioner Urban. We are in discussion. Commissioner Anderson.
Okay, so from my perspective, I don't think I'm able to support that motion. And, you know, here's the reason is that and I'm not sure if we need a motion to do this or not, but for example, you know, I am not entirely sure what it means to have an immediate and thorough investigation. I mean, in essence, are we kind of asking for our Department of Public Safety to turn loose, you know, on the gospel mission? I mean, I don't really even know what that means exactly. So I think this is rather, you know, a unclear list to give directions to the city manager. And another one, to ask the city manager to provide immediate access for mental, emotional, physical health supports for residents of the encampment. I mean, so we already went through this process where we're asking Jim to work. I mean, as I understand it, Jim has been doing that work, attempting to get to these things, but the idea that we're asking Jim to do that, if that's what we're doing in this motion, then I don't see how I could support that idea such as it is.
Commissioner Cooney.
So I didn't hear it that way. I heard you say that what you wanted to do was for the city manager to look through these things and come back with recommendations on each of these items. Was that it? So we're not going to we're not voting tonight to do an investigation of the gospel mission. We're not voting that we do that. But what we're saying is, Jim, would you look at these things and come back and tell us what your recommendation would be with them? And then it's up to us again to make a decision on what we want to do with his recommendation.
Now, I don't think the motion was as clear as you just laid it out. So I don't know if we have the original language from the motion, but I don't think it was anywhere near suggesting that. So if it's just a matter of interpretation, you know, that makes it unclear also.
I saw Commissioner Urban first, and then Commissioner
Well, thank you. I think what we're wrestling with is some anxiety about wording, and we could take the kind of the right brain approach to this and say, well, we're on the right track. and or we could take the left-man approach to it, is I want to know what I'm getting into with this particular wording. And both ways of looking at this are legitimate. Given the fact that we all have different Myers-Briggs types, we have to allow for that, right? So I'm hoping that between what Commissioner Sykes proposed and the discussion that followed, I think that if we come to an obstacle that is insurmountable in the course of Jim doing his research on, say, item 2, he'll get back to us. For example, if it turns out the city does not have jurisdiction in the cases that were brought to DPS's public safety's attention, well, that settles it. Clearly, we can't make something out of something that's not there. So immediate and thorough to me means open up the ears and take down the notes of people who come forward. If they don't come forward, well, it's shame on them. I don't expect the city can go around snooping on anybody, but there are people who apparently have complaints, and if they haven't been formally heard yet, and it's not clear whether they are criminal or not, well, that's all we're asking. I think that's what's being asked here, is to just look into it. And there's some immediacy about it. I recognize the immediacy. It's been a month since this all began, and I'm a little surprised that we don't have more to report on that particular item. So I think I'd rather not have us go into a lot of detail. It seems to me that simply endorsing the city manager's reporting back to us with what he thinks the next steps should be for our city in concert with others is good enough for right now. We'll see what's good enough a week from now or a month from now. We have to start with something, and I would really like to have a formal vote on this. I think that it gives some clarity to the general public as well.
Thank you. Commissioner Sykes.
Yeah, so just clarifying, I'm sorry if my motion was unclear. And it sounds like it must have been, because it sounds like what I meant was somewhere in the middle of what I'm hearing. And it's this. I would like to ask that Jim Ritzma, that City Manager Ritzma, guide the work group in attempting to go through these item by item to make it happen. I trust you enough, City Manager Ritzma, that I don't think you need to come back and report to us what you want to move forward on. I think the only time that I would ask for you to come back and report to us would be if you get to an item, for instance, number 4, and you're like, listen, there is just no way possible to make that happen. We tried, we couldn't do it. That's the only time that I feel like I need to hear from you, City Manager Ritzma. I also would like to suggest that I don't believe, and City Attorney Robinson, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, I don't believe that voting to say we would like Jim to explore these options item by item with the work group as purely a symbolic vote creates any sort of like legally binding contract. I would remind our body that we have voted on things that said we were going to end generational poverty. Knowing that that is not a thing we can do by ourselves as city government, knowing that that requires partnerships, knowing that that requires, additional funding in addition to what we have, and just having the faith that we can bring in that funding, work really hard to make it happen. And so we stated our conviction. We stated the fact that this was what we wanted to do. Understanding that later, we could come back, and we have now, in saying we can't actually end generational poverty, but we can work towards it. So again, I'm simply asking for us to vote to give City Manager Ritzma the direction of the body, for those of us who agree, that he explore each one of these items, in order with the work group, including the folks, the leadership team from the encampment, to see how we can proceed through those things. I think as long as we as a city commit to doing that, then I think we can get back to the negotiations over where folks are at during the time that we're waiting. I think the big holdup has been we have not shown a good faith effort, to say, yes, we are going to try our best to respond to these.
Commissioner Cunningham?
No, I was only going to ask for clarity.
I'm going to dive in here. I guess I'm not comfortable with especially 1 and 2. We were already doing 1. I mean, so if we're talking about this list, we're talking about what's on this page. Number 2, I think that's certainly a criminal thing between individuals and the public safety. So what I'd say is report your issues to public safety. If they're not followed through with, there's a process for when they aren't doing their job, which is our inspector's office. The other 3, and the other one on number 2, I don't think you want to explore someone's criminal or alleged criminal stuff until those allegations are placed in public safety's hands, that it shouldn't be the work group dealing with that stuff. The other piece is there a governing body for shelters? I don't know. So if there's a certifying body or whatever, then I think that's another way that it's reported. Again, I don't think that there necessarily is. On 3, 4, and 5, if it's about having the work group discuss those items and work on those items to see where there's opportunities, I have no issue with that. So if that's what we're saying, I'm okay. The number 1 and 2, I'm not. Mr. Anderson, and that's, to me, that's the confusing part. I mean, if we say number 1, we're already doing that. He doesn't need to. So understand when you say this list, that number 1's included. Number 2, just it does not make, for me, sense that the work group is talking about criminal stuff or whatever. That is an individual's responsibility, or not, I shouldn't say responsibility, but an individual in the gospel mission. They should be reporting issues to law enforcement, and then, because I don't think you want to be dealing with criminal issues if the gospel mission is at the table with you either. I think that needs to be law enforcement spot. Commissioner Cooney.
So, my understanding, I am not on board with number 2. But I'm willing to say that if the city manager wants to come back to us with a recommendation, that I'm open to hear his recommendation. But right now, I am not on board for number 2. The others I'm up for.
I assume number 1 is, since we're doing that.
We're doing it, so that's off the table. And I have no trouble with the city manager looking at all of them and coming back to his recommendation. But I just want to say that at this point, I am not in favor of number 2.
Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you, Mayor. So, I want to obviously treat this very seriously. I don't want to be flip at all. But to me, it's a very unusual and precedent-setting situation where we're actually taking action here. I know it's not legal, obviously not enforceable, but to ask our city manager, presumably, to proactively investigate a private agency here in Kalamazoo that we have no connection with. We don't fund the gospel mission. We have no connection with the gospel mission. I personally have no connection with the gospel mission other than, working oftentimes as a partner in the general work of trying to address homelessness. I mean, along the lines of doing this, why shouldn't we suggest that the city, investigate DHHS? I mean, from time to time, I hear bad stories from people about the treatment they feel they've gotten at DHHS. Why wouldn't we direct the city to start an investigation of all activities at DHHS, see if there were some things that happened there that weren't appropriate? Why don't we do that at Loaves and Fishes, for example? Loaves and Fishes, some people have been disappointed lately that I've heard about how they've been treated. They've been changing how often you can get, groceries there, that sort of thing. So that just seems like a precedent that I'm very uncomfortable with. as far as it goes with the gospel mission, is that, it is a fact, like it or not, is that there's probably in the area of 650 emergency shelter type beds in Kalamazoo County, and beds or inside sleeping mats, all that included. The Gospel Mission happens to provide in the neighborhood of 500 of those. It is for better or for worse, in our current situation, it is a profoundly critical component of offering people temporary shelter out of the weather, presumably, in a situation that provides some relief. And in addition, there are thousands and thousands of people who donate from their hard-earned income to the Gospel Mission, which is what supports their activities, who are doing so from their heart with the best intent related to wanting to be of service and help people in need. Not unlike, really every philanthropic activity that happens here in town. Similarly, we could ask that the First Presbyterian Church be investigated related to some complaints about the dinners that they're providing and what's happening with all that. So, I want to take this seriously, and I understand concerns. There's no way in the world that you are going to be as big a player in providing shelter in Kalamazoo and not have areas where you don't agree. And I don't have any firsthand experience with recognizing whether criminal actions have occurred there, but I am not the filter for that. And I wholly agree with the mayor that, if someone identifies something like that that's occurring with any, on the street, in an institution, in a grocery store, wherever around town, that particular information, needs to be communicated to public safety. But relative to this idea of us sort of asking the city manager to begin this process at our direction to investigate this agency or that agency, I really can say I'm not comfortable with that.
Thank you, Commissioner. Manager Ritzman.
Yeah, I think I can help with this one. So a week before last Friday, there was a group of representatives from the homeless population that met with Pastor Brown in the Gospel Mission, and a lot of the concerns were aired during that meeting. What I took out of that meeting is he's committed to looking into them, addressing them. I think some of the concern that I've heard from folks in the encampment is how soon will change come. What I can do is continue, and I gotta also say he's at the table right now as part of the work group, he and another representative. They are willing to be a part of this conversation. We can understand where their funding comes from to see what level of, or who can investigate. Obviously, if, like I said before, if there's criminal allegations, public safety can get involved, and I can work with the chief to come up with a process for that that works best, and then also identify if there is an appropriate investigatory body, we could also identify that.
Just a quick little question for clarifying.
Sure.
So you're saying you're comfortable too?
I'm comfortable with exploring it and convinced that they're going to be part of this process anyways. So what I heard from Pastor Brown is a lot of those concerns that were raised were new to him. So, and they've already been working on reviewing their policies and seeing where adjustments can be made to the benefit of those that use the shelter.
Commissioner Cunningham.
My advice, or what I would advise, is we have a motion on the floor. Personally, I think we should, I would advise my colleagues to turn it down and then re-motion to exclude the first and maybe the second demand advised by our Honorable Mayor.
Commissioner Urban.
I have a suggestion about that. Given what the city manager has just reported to us about item number 2, if we could just simply arrive at an understanding that the city has taken or will take any complaints about criminal activity inside the Gospel Mission, to record them and somehow eventually get back whether this qualifies as something that's within the city's jurisdiction to deal with or not. So in other words, basically all we have to do with number 2, beyond what is already going on with Pastor Brown, that we want to continue. We don't want to wreck that. That's where a lot of stuff that has to do with dignity and respect is going to be dealt with. When you get to the law, lots of times dignity and respect is out the window by the time you get to that point, right? We want to get to dealing with a lot of this at the earlier stage. But in the case where there may have been some criminal abuse, if we just had some assurance that people have gone to the DPS and filed their complaints, and that's been recorded, and we learn what we can that doesn't break confidences and wreck what could end up being going to trial. You know how it is with once an investigation starts, everybody shuts up because it can prejudice the jury and all that kind of stuff. So I think what we're well in the range of being okay with as it was originally worded, as far as I'm concerned.
So I'm going to take, because you folks have had multiple chances, I haven't done that. So, you know, as even diving into 4 is an interesting thing. So we find a building, we find houses, then what? I mean, some of those then whats, I'm trying to make sure that, one of the things that frustrates me is that the city of Kalamazoo is not the only municipality in this county. And that if everyone's on the table, so if we got to do this, that, and the other thing, this is a demand of a community, shouldn't just be a demand of the demands of City of Kalamazoo. And so I get frustrated when we're being challenged to do something by others, but I don't know what those other municipalities are doing themselves. Doesn't mean they aren't doing anything, but I think we all know that not every person that's homeless is from this city. We also know that we do our best to take care of folks in this city because, you know, the chief still has to have EMS respond if someone is from or not from Kalamazoo. I mean, it's part of what has to happen, but we have to have a community approach as well. So, you know, I'm almost wanting to make sure the manager is talking to the other municipalities to see what their plans are to work with this city to do these things, because I believe that everybody has a capacity to do. I've heard multiple people say that. I've heard Commissioner Sykes say that up here. So let's make sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate and contribute to our community as a whole. So there's a lot more work here. I think that generally I'm comfortable with 3, 4, and 5. I think we need to let 2 be what it is. Public safety handles criminal stuff, and then go from there. So that's where I am. If 2 stays in, I can't support the motion. And if it stays in the way it is. And I don't know that we need it because I think the chief understands and the manager understands what their responsibility is to enforce the law. Commissioner Cooney.
So I'm for number 4 because I think this is an initiative that came from the people in the park. And I think we should explore that and let them know what is involved in this. And then if they want to go on with that, I think we should encourage that. That's one thing. And for number 2, I agree with Commissioner Cunningham. Let's drop it. I'm very pleased with you having a continued dialogue with Pastor Brown. And I don't think that we need to say anything about an abuse right now. I think let him continue the dialogue.
Commissioner Sykes.
I would like to reiterate for the 3rd or 4th time, we are not talking about alleged ethical abuse, which means that a complaint of how dinner is served is not at all what we're talking about. I would also like to remind us that the vast majority of our budget is spent on the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety. So it is absolutely our place to say. And I mean, so I find it perfectly reasonable to advise the city manager, to advise Chief Thomas, who I know likely has no problem with this, to take any reports, or somebody take any reports of criminal abuse. And if those reports are taken, then obviously investigate those the way we would any other criminal complaint in any other entity. I would suggest that, let's say, we're great partners with WMU. If we were to find out that in a building owned by Western, someone had been physically attacked, we would have no problem saying, you know, KDPS, it is your job after all to investigate this. The reason that it's on this list is because there are multiple folks here or in the encampment, because I've heard so many stories I can't keep up with whose is whose, but saying that things happened, they told the first officer they came in contact with, and the officer blew them off as if they did not matter, as if they were trash, as if they were not human. And so folks are feeling as if, although they had complaints, they weren't responded to. So again, we're not talking about whether or not I necessarily like the services. We're not talking about what time I have to leave or come back. We are not even talking about whether or not the Kalamazoo Gospel Mission has the policy that if they find out that you're gay, they kick you out. We're not even suggesting that is our responsibility to discuss. What we are saying is we have a job to do. One of those things is to advise City Manager Ritzma, who supervises runs, sort of, Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety. I don't think there's anything wrong with reiterating that, yeah, we should take complaints. And again, this is just us, offering our acknowledgement of what has been asked and saying, we support that happening. I can't figure out for the life of me why we would not be supportive of our officers taking reports of criminal complaints and investigating if they see cause to. It baffles me that we wouldn't be comfortable with that. So that's my thought on that. And I don't feel like we have to beat a dead horse. I think a lot of folks feel really strongly about where they stand. I would just like to say, once we're done stating why, let's go ahead and call the question, make the vote, and then at least, our votes go on record and we can go on about our evenings.
Commissioner Cunningham.
So I want to say a couple things in regards to action item or the item number 2. I think where the sensitivity comes in at is one, if correct me if I'm wrong, you just want our city manager to keep continuous communication in regards to these issues. Am I right?
What I want is to say as a commission body that we support and hope or intend for City Manager Ritzma to work through items 2 through 5, understanding that we completed item 1 tonight. That's it. I want us as a body to say, City Manager, these are the items, we support you and hope that you will move through items 2 through 5.
For that, I can say yes to in support of with, and I'm going to make this clarification just so the community completely understands. My sensitivity is an immediate and thorough investigation. We're not advising our police force to have an immediate and thorough investigation. We are advising our city manager to have continuous communication and address things in a fashion that is within our policy. This is, I think, where our sensitivity comes in is we don't want to give the perception to the community that we are singling out the gospel mission. We are giving the perception that we want everything to be done in decency and in order, because an immediate and thorough investigation gives the impression that we are going to skip some of the issues that maybe other complaints had about other places. We're not saying that. We're not targeting the gospel mission from a police standpoint. We're just saying we're continuing continuous communication and dialogue for our city manager.
Commissioner Cunningham.
I don't want the headline in the Kalamazoo Gazette tomorrow to be that the City Commission endorses a thorough and immediate investigation of the Kalamazoo Gospel Mission. So I think what you just said, I endorse. And I think that we should that should be the wording rather than what's here. Because I can't endorse an immediate, him looking into an immediate and thorough investigation. I can endorse him continuing a dialogue with Pastor Brown about what's happening at Gospel Mission and how can we fix it.
And guaranteed, that will be the headline. It will be, one of the headlines will be, because it's on this paper, that that's what we did. No matter what we say we did, that's what it's gonna say. And I love the media, appreciate you, and I would never be like our president because you serve a very important function, but we don't always get it right. We can agree on that. So no, I can't support it with number 2, with the wording that is there.
So you worded it right. Let's make a proposal.
Well, we have a motion on the floor still.
Well, the motion was,
He didn't make a motion.
let me rephrase. You've already motioned, and I don't know if that's considered a motion amendment. How are we kind of playing this out? Because the original motion was all 5, my perception. All right, so that being said, this is not an emotion. This is not a motion to take action on all of these items. This is only a motion to support our city commissioner to continue communicate. City manager to continue communication in regards to these issues.
You moving that as a substitute?
So,
Is that right?
in that case, I guess that would be a question. What would be the advice from Attorney Robinson in regards to us motioning to have him support? Hopefully you caught the dialogue, but yeah, I'll let you.
So keep in mind, one, we have a motion on the floor. And I understand the intent of the motion, but the motion has all 5 items still in here. So either way, Mr. Clerk, please read back the motion, please.
One moment. As I have it, the motion was that the city commission supports the city manager in moving through the demands as listed, knowing that he, the city manager, will need to come back to the city commission from time to time for direction, support, and ideas.
So that's still all 5 items. So either way, if we're thinking that item 1 is done, then we have to address that. As I see it, that's the items on the table. Commissioner Sykes?
Yes, so apologies for not wording it right when I officially recorded the motion, although I think we would all agree that I've said it multiple times up here. But I am happy to amend my own motion if Commissioner Urban would support that, to say, as I have said, I move that we vote to support and direct City Manager Ritzma to move through these line items 2 through 5 in collaboration with the folks in the encampment and the work group. I don't know how much more specific I need to get. Doing the business of the city as it pertains to city policy without going overboard to specifically single out one agency, but simply to understand where our responsibility is. Again, items 2 through 5, to move through those items and to let us know if for some reason you reach a roadblock and you cannot move forward on that item. Does that make it more clear?
The challenge I have, and again, I can't support the motion as it stands, because 1, I don't believe the work group should be doing anything regarding criminal issues. And when you say the work group, which was said in the motion, that means that they are charged with the manager to look at, whether they do anything about, look at criminal stuff that folks believe is happening at the Gospel Mission. My issue is we have a chief. If someone feels that their issue has not been investigated, there are steps that the department has to deal with the officer that did or did not do what they were supposed to do. If you have a criminal complaint against anyone, I don't care whom it is, call the Department of Public Safety. Connect with Officer Awa, who's always, not always, but often in the park. Make the complaint. Make the complaint. Get your case number. All of those things are part of the process. I don't know that we need to direct the manager to work with the work group on item 2. I cannot support the motion. That's okay. You may all do that, but I'm not going to support that motion. Commissioner Kuhn.
Mr. Sykes, I want to ask you this question. My understanding is that there are people who have some concerns, serious concerns about what's happening at the Gospel Mission. Would it satisfy if we said that the city manager would facilitate a dialogue between the people that have concerns and Pastor Brown to see if we could settle those things?
I want to say, number 1, this is only a direction for the city manager, not for a work group. I have no authority to vote on a direction to another individual. It is simply directing City Manager Ritzma to encourage, how about that? Encourage our officers, should they receive a criminal complaint, we investigate, which I know is how we are supposed to function. But I think this dialogue up here is a very good indication for why, when somebody's staying in the mission, when they lift up a concern, a criminal complaint, we're talking like physical abuse, why they are not being heard or believed or supported in that. I think our fear to simply tell city staff, city officers to do their jobs in regard to criminal complaints is, for me, incredibly concerning. incredibly concerning. We should never be. And as a survivor of domestic abuse, I can tell you that I never would feel comfortable simply sitting in a room in dialogue with those responsible. The first thing that I would want was for KDPS to do their job, as is KDPS policy, and say, the folks in the encampment, because I can tell you, once folks know that we've made this agreement, the minute an officer shows up in the park, they will probably receive some information. And this time, that information should be recorded. That's it. We should not be afraid to say, officers, it's okay to do your jobs when it comes to the Kalamazoo Gospel Mission. On that note, I'm still engaging, but I have to use the bathroom, so I just don't want you all to think that I'm walking away from the conversation.
Commissioner Andrews.
I don't want to extend it. You know, I don't disagree at all with Commissioner Sykes. You know, if something's going on, I mean, it's criminal in nature. It's the responsibility of our public safety department in the city of Kalamazoo to respond to that. I totally agree with that. That's one thing. We're having all kinds of different discussions, and we've had probably now half a dozen different rephrasings of this motion and proposed adjustments to it. So I just want to cook it down to, we got a document, which we got just tonight, and I am not comfortable supporting, you know, whatever, you know, there's a document with specific language in it. However we want to nuance it in all our conversation, that's that. We have a document with specific language in it which calls for an immediate and thorough investigation of the alleged abuses occurring on site. So I'm not comfortable because this is the document. If we want to sit around and kind of rewrite the things, maybe we can come up with some sort of compromise language. We've attempted to do that, but at the end of the day, we boil right through all that compromise language and we come right back to the document and the words that are in it. So, you know, that really doesn't get us anywhere for me.
Commissioner Urban.
Well, lots of public meetings with public officials since I was on the county commission and here, and very often it comes down to a lot of intense discussion about very specific words, whereas I tend to get the gist of what's being asked and figure that the people who are going to be charged with doing the actions have the discernment and the judgment to interpret what's being requested by the tone of whatever else is going on around the motion. So I think we're trying to put too fine a point on something here. If it turns out that we vote on this thing and it's voted down because item 2 is included as written, I'm going to turn right around and make another motion that is going to be a little bit more narrowly focused, but it's still going to have the idea that we expect the public safety to do its job with respect to hearing complaints and acting on them.
Mr. Manager, do you have a comment?
Yeah, I just want to, I want to just ask for very clear direction tonight, because once that's given, that's what I'm going to be doing, and I just don't want expectations out there that I'm going to do anything more or different than that. Second, I just want to understand too the timing of this. Right now, we've set up meetings and have commitments from the work group to meet weekly, and I believe that's a reasonable frequency right now. So just want to understand from the commission what the expectation is. I heard Commissioner Sykes say if there's an impasse or something to bring that back. Is that what the expectation is, that that's when I would come back to this body?
That's
I don't know what that means. When,
I heard if on any of these points say we couldn't come up with a vacant building, and nothing, an alternative that satisfies that, to me, that would be an impasse. I'm just getting clarification on that. That's.
Commissioner Kine?
And that's the reason why the motion is not really an easy, outside of it being symbolic, it's not really an easy motion to pass because of, and this is the thing, at that point, we're leaving it up to your discretion on at what point you should come back to the commission to say X, Y, and Z. But even going back to item 2, I think my colleagues have a frustration in the fact that the immediate and thorough investigation almost sounds as if we are targeting, but we are not. And that goes back to, she's made it definitely clear that we're not stating anything in regards to the gospel mission. We are stating that we just want our city manager to have open dialogue in regards to these issues. Well, and that's the thing. I don't think that she was specific other than we'll have open dialogue regarding the 4 issues that remain on the Bronson Park Freedom Encampment demand.
So could that be what the motion is then? That helps, specifically for number 2.
So before we get to that, the attorney's been waiting to get in here, and so I'm gonna let him.
Yeah.
I know you're struggling with this, playing around with this motion too much, aren't you? Yeah, I knew it.
I don't mean this negatively, but it's when I read a case from the Supreme Court and I got 3 opinions, none of them have a majority. I'm thinking, what the heck do the judges mean? Can't figure it out because they're all over the place. And I guess I'm voicing my frustration. You guys are really working hard on this. So you're doing a lot of chopping, but there's no wood flying. Let me suggest this. Hopefully this will move us along. That the motion that has been made gets withdrawn and start with a clean canvas. I would suggest then the motion reads something along these lines. That in response to the demands that were made, that the city commission direct the manager to number one, the city commission affirms that KDPS will investigate alleged criminal acts committed against the homeless. That does a couple of things. The immediate and thorough investigation of alleged abuses is too broad. And alleged abuses, we've distilled it down to criminal acts, but alleged abuses is a very, very broad statement that covers all manner of sins. And rather than target the Kalamazoo Gospel Mission, there may be other institutions that there were criminal acts at. Why narrow it down to one provider? So you affirm that the Public Safety Department will investigate alleged criminal acts against the homeless. A duty that we have anyway. It's just affirming that duty. And then on numbers 3 through 5, that you support and direct the city manager to move through those items with the work group, and I would say periodically report back to the city commission. If there's something that Jim feels is important because he's reached a breakthrough or he's reached an impasse, he reports it back to you. But there's no need to report every day or every week if there's nothing that's happening. That's just my suggestion.
So moved.
No,
Support.
No, well, the first request was that the motion be withdrawn, so.
Yes.
Let's, okay. So the motion has been withdrawn, is that what you're
Yes,
saying?
yes, I would like to withdraw the motion.
Thank you. So is there enough to just say that you're moving the wording that the city attorney presented in his statement? or does it need to, if the clerk got it? You got it? Gave us 2 thumbs up, so anyone can make that motion.
Do you mind reading it for us again?
Okay. City Attorney, correct me if I'm wrong. So the motion is that in response to the demands presented, that the City Commission affirms that the Kalamazoo Department of Public Safety will investigate alleged criminal acts against the homeless, and that in response to demands 3 through 5, the city manager is directed to work through these items with the established work group and report back to the City Commission periodically.
I make that motion.
Nice go.
Support.
A motion by Commissioner Sykes, supported by Commissioner Urban. Is there further discussion from the commission on the motion? Roll call. Oh, did you have your finger? Roll call, please, Mr. Clerk.
Commissioner Urban.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Knott.
Yes.
Mayor Hopewell.
Yes.
Commissioner Anderson.
Yes.
Commissioner Cooney.
Yes.
Commissioner Cunningham.
Yes.
Commissioner Sykes.
Yes.
Thank you. Motion carried. Commissioner or Vice Mayor Knott, we are at your opportunity. Because we were in commissioner comments, you didn't have a chance.
I think I will just say that tonight was a good night. Again, when Commissioner Cunningham proposed the motion to discuss the demands, I was the sole no vote because of kind of what went on. I will be the first to admit that the conversation was good. The city attorney led us to the right path, and we have something that I think is very workable that we're going to be able to hold the city manager accountable to. It's transparent, there's accountability benchmarks, but again, guys, I implore the work group and everybody up here, we have to get our counterparts throughout the county involved in this work. This is not the city of Kalamazoo's problem exclusively, and we're not going to solve this without our county and other municipal partners at the table.
Thank you, and I'm going to re-echo that, and I want to remind the press, she said not exclusively, before we get someone getting it wrong, that the Vice Mayor said it's not our issue, so I want to make sure we are clear on that. I also want to thank the townships of Comstock and the city of Portage responding to the city manager's, I won't say call, but email in regards to some of the demands that were made earlier. And so we appreciate that at least a response was given back by those municipalities, unlike some such as Ostermo.
I think K Township did respond.
And K Township did, good. K Township as well. So, but there's others that did not respond, and that's unfortunate because, again, not exclusively a Kalamazoo city issue. These are all folks that are in our community, and the opportunity is for all. We are adjourned.